This is EWA Radio, the official podcast of the Education Writers Association, and I'm public editor Emily Richmond. Has any part of the U.S. public school curriculum come back from the dead as many times as the cursive handwriting requirement? From Connecticut to California, lawmakers are alternatively fighting to either mandate it or ban it, and in some cases leaving it up to individual districts, schools, and even the teachers to deliver the final verdict. That's the case in Maine, where Noel Gallagher of the Portland Press Herald recently looked at the fate of cursive writing in the Pine Tree State. She joins us today. Noel, welcome to EWA Radio.
Thanks, Emily. Glad to be here.
Why did you want to tell the story?
I think when you can talk about what students are experiencing in the classroom, it's always a good story. And cursive and handwriting is one of those things that readers have vivid memories of in their own childhood, but it's changed.
What has changed or what hasn't changed in how cursive writing is taught?
I think there's a lot of focus these days with electronic use. And I think that's what was really compelling about this as I wanted to look into cursive. There is a lot of concern around whether the fact that kids are on devices more has changed their learning ability or their attention span, many things. And handwriting and cursive has come up in conversation and in general about an area that as kids do more online, are they losing the ability to write?
Well, I think there's no question if you walk around a classroom today, you'll see that kids' thumbs have never been stronger. But certainly, that handwriting piece is not really there the way it was. How prevalent is cursive instruction in Maine?
It's hard to tell because we have local control. So the state does not mandate it. So it's completely up to local districts to decide, and we have hundreds. So short of calling them each one, there's no number. The schools in my area and the districts in my area are a mixed bag. A very large town next to Portland, South Portland, does not do it. Portland doesn't mandate it, but some teachers do it. So it really can be up to individual schools and districts.
You did look at cursive teaching patterns nationally. What did you find out?
Well, it's interesting because it's definitely a moving target. Even as I was trying to pin down how many states have it, there was legislation taking effect that was changing the number. It is now required in 14 states. And what's interesting is that some states that already required it, such as Mississippi, this year they had a new law that required actually testing in cursive, not just teaching. So clearly in Mississippi, there was a conversation about going beyond instruction and making sure that it was not a cursory, no pun intended, attempt to learn cursive and have those students be able to perform.
So what's been the reaction to the story? Have you heard from readers who have had their own experiences with cursive writing?
I have received letters both from all cap thank you letters and how they are so enthusiastic about the idea of cursive being required or introduced in classrooms. And I heard from a number of left-handed writers. They described having great difficulty learning cursive as children and that it was a horrible experience for them, some of which even included having to switch to be right-handed writers. So there's maybe a little bit of difficulty when you're a left-handed writer.
We did mention, jokingly I should say, about students' thumbs being stronger from all the texting, but as your story brings up, there are some legitimate concerns about children's dexterity in this electronic age. Tell us what you found.
I had several occupational therapists tell me that they had students coming to them in second, third, fourth grade who were having difficulty writing print. And they learned, and they say it's broader than just students that come to them for extra help. Kids just don't have the hand strength and the finger dexterity that they used to. And they describe it as being a result of more electronics. Kids simply are on them more, or they're on TV. They aren't using their hands. They aren't playing with clay. They aren't playing in sandboxes, bats, balls, all those things where you're using your hands to play. It's just not as common. And so pencil grip has become an issue. Print has become an issue. Cursive is part of that. They say even scissors skills in pre-K and K are very weak compared to a generation ago. And cursive, in a way, can really help a child that is having a hard time printing because you don't leave the tip of the pencil off the paper in cursive. It helps them. They can do cursive better than they can do print because they aren't lifting the pencil and trying again with the next letter.
Give us some of the highlights, the arguments that are made for these cursive enthusiasts. I mean, in addition, of course, to the idea that kids may not be as dexterous as they once were because of so much time spent on their phones. Why do we need cursive?
It's an interesting situation because there are concerns that did not bear fruit. I went into the story curious about the brain science around it. Is there actually something about cursive that helps wire the brain in young minds? That has turned out to not be true. There's been a lot of research out of Indiana University on this. And what they've found is that if you learn how to write, no matter whether it's print or cursive, that is what makes the connection. But it's not cursive itself that makes the big difference. So there's not a medical or biological issue that's going on. As for other reasons to learn, the big thing I heard over and over again is it simply helps students get their thoughts down. It's a faster form of handwriting than printing, and that can allow them in a handwriting situation to communicate better, more fluently, not have a delay between what they're thinking and what they're actually putting down on paper. And they're learning this in third grade, fourth grade. And where it really can pay off is the college years, taking notes in college classes, things like that.
This is where I think you did a great job of laying this out. And the idea that we're not just talking about this short-term idea for little kids. I mean, obviously you would say, why does a third grader need to have pretty fancy handwriting? But really that connection to their life beyond school and after school. And I mean, certainly there have been a lot of studies lately that kids retain information better when they write it down versus typing it, and being able to take those notes quickly in a college class. I thought that was a really fascinating angle.
And that comes up a lot. And I think it's still changing, but I think that you read about college professors who are starting to ban electronic devices. They don't want the sea of laptops in front of them. They want kids who are actually writing down what's going on. They know that they remember better, and that makes a big difference.
We're talking with Noel Gallagher of the Portland Press Herald about the resurgence of cursive handwriting, both nationally and in her home state of Maine. Don't miss an episode of EWA Radio. You never have to. You can find us on your favorite podcast app. And don't forget to take a moment to rate us on iTunes. Your support and feedback will help us grow. This week's episode is sponsored by the Eli and Edith Broad Foundation. The Broad Foundation believes in the power of public education, the potential of students, and the possibilities created by expanding learning opportunities for all children. Visit broadfoundation.org for more information. EWA retains all control over editorial content and programming. Noel, I wanted to ask, how does cursive writing fit into the required curriculum in Maine? Is there time in the day if teachers do opt to do this?
That's a really good point. I think that there is concern that teachers are increasingly asked to add things all the time. We here in Maine just got our what we call bill titles. There's no text to these bills for the legislature, and there's in fact a cursive bill among them that would require it. We have not seen that bill in the past, so my story turned out to be well-timed. The interesting thing is there's several other bills requiring computer science and financial literacy be taught, and this is very typical. Every year, there's always a group of people who say, you know what kids really need to learn today for today's job place or today's workforce? They need financial literacy, they need computer science, they need keyboarding, and they have to make choices in the classroom about the time. When I spoke to the company that has done a lot of the curriculum and lesson planning for handwriting, it's very clear they don't need a whole lot of time. They say that a good rule of thumb is to have a program that starts in third grade, and they would encourage people to do it over 25 weeks, and it takes 30 minutes a week. So it's not a huge time-consuming program. And that's what introduces them to the shape of the letters. And then beyond that, if they want to reemphasize cursive, they say just incorporate it into the lesson plan. For example, in fourth grade or fifth grade, okay, it's the spelling list. Do them in cursive this week.
What do the kids say when you talk to them, when you talk to students who are either learning this or being asked to do it?
Well, I was with a group of third graders, and they had not made it all the way through the alphabet. So they were sort of midstream on what they were learning. They were not writing whole essays by any means, but they would learn a letter and then they would do the workbook with short words and short sentences. And they all really seemed to enjoy it. Even the ones who took the longest, there was no sense of frustration. They were very excited. And I talked to them afterwards, and several of them talked about needing a signature, and they talked about wanting to be able to read things like the Declaration of Independence. They had seen cursive writing in books. Many kids that age are reading graphic novels, and they will frequently switch over to cursive just for a couple of cells or to make a point about something. And I know with my own children, they will come to me before they'd learned cursive and say, oh, can you read this to me? So this is in their own literature that they're reading. So they love it. And the teacher told me that the kids feel like they're all grown up when they learn cursive. It's a point of pride.
Certainly at a time when we're talking about the importance of media literacy, part of that is being able to make a historical connection to information.
Absolutely. And that does matter a lot. It was interesting to talk to a person at the Maine Historical Society, where they regularly have people come in to look at original documents, sometimes for personal genealogy, sometimes for research. And they said that it is definitely an issue. They sometimes have to provide transcripts because people aren't familiar with cursive handwriting or the form of cursive handwriting, because the further back you go, it seems the fancier it can get.
You mentioned a term early in our conversation, and that was local control. And I'm wondering if in any way this conversation about whether or not to teach cursive is indicative of how Maine approaches instruction generally, really leaving this up to individual schools and sometimes even the teachers.
I think that's definitely the case. The state has for decades had state standards by grade, and everybody knows what those standards are, but how they reach them is absolutely up to the local district. There is no standard that specifically says students need to know cursive, and that's why this falls into that gray area. The school I was at was in a town called Gorham, and Gorham adopted an entire cursive instruction district-wide requirement, and it says that grade 3 teachers have to teach letter formation and signature only. So it's a very sort of narrow, this is the requirement, and then beyond that, they may extend cursive if they choose to. So it shows how there is choices to be made, how far you want to go. One thing that a teacher also told me was that they can sometimes find either very young or very senior teachers coming into classrooms where the younger teachers may not have learned cursive themselves. And the senior teachers may have learned a different kind of cursive than is taught today, one that's more Palmer method or more fancy is what it looks like on paper. So it could be an education for teachers who are, in fact, teaching cursive.
What advice do you have for reporters who may be thinking about checking into the cursive requirements in their own districts?
Finding out whether it's coming up as an issue, I think, is really important because there are misconceptions. Inevitably, there is this kind of a boogeyman idea of electronics and handwriting, some of which is true and some of which is not. And like I mentioned, the brain science, there's not a problem with that. If kids are learning to print or handwrite, cursive is not going to change it. But there is something to the idea of pencil grip and learning how to write. So I think a good angle for reporters might be what has raised the issue of cursive and delving into it. I think getting into the classroom is really important for this kind of story. You get the reactions of the young people and the teachers, and you can see the work right there. You can see the pride as they write their handwritten signatures or turn in their work and have the teacher look over it. It's really great.
Noel Gallagher covers education for the Portland Press Herald and joined us from her office today. Noel, thanks for making time for EWA Radio.
A pleasure. Nice to talk to you.
And that wraps up another episode for us. If there's a story you want to know more about, drop us a line at radio@ewa.org. The mission of the Education Writers Association is to strengthen the community of education journalists and improve the quality of education coverage. For more than 70 years, EWA has helped reporters get the story right. Have a great week, and thanks for listening.